Your soulmate's final love letter was just found. Read it before tomorrow. My beloved child. A letter has just been found that was never supposed to be seen again, and somehow, it carries the words your soulmate couldn't bring themselves to say out loud. It wasn't discovered where you would expect. It had been kept away, folded carefully, almost as if someone was afraid that the wrong person might read it. And the strangest part? The letter appears to have been written with you in mind. There are feelings inside those pages that sound painfully familiar. A memory only the two of you could understand. A moment that seemed insignificant at the time, but apparently changed everything for them. Don't skip, because the final lines of this letter may explain why your soulmate has been so distant, so quiet, or so strangely emotional lately. But there's something else you need to know. This wasn't simply an old love letter. It was written as though they believed there might come a day when they would no longer have the courage to tell you themselves. And as the letter was opened, one sentence immediately stood out. Your soulmate admitted that there was something they had wanted to confess for a very long time, but every time they came close to saying it, fear took over. Not fear of loving you. Fear of what would happen once you finally knew the truth. They wrote about watching opportunities pass, pretending they were fine, and secretly wondering whether you had already moved on. Then came a confession that changes the meaning of everything that happened between you. They said there was a moment when they almost reached out to you, but stopped because someone convinced them that you didn't feel the same way. Imagine carrying that misunderstanding for months or even years. Imagine believing the person you love doesn't want you, while that person is quietly waiting for you to make the first move. The letter reveals that your soulmate has replayed one particular conversation again and again, wishing they could go back and say just one different sentence. And that sentence is finally revealed near the end. But then something unexpected was found beneath the letter, a second page that wasn't originally attached to it. And this is where the story becomes much more personal. The handwriting changes slightly, as if your soulmate wrote the final words much later, after something happened that completely shifted their perspective. They wrote that they had reached a point where silence no longer felt safe for their heart. They couldn't keep pretending that losing you wouldn't hurt. They couldn't keep telling themselves that there would always be another chance. And then came the line that may explain why this letter was hidden until now. If you ever find this, it means I finally stopped running from what I feel. Stay till the end, because the letter doesn't end there. The final sentence contains a decision your soulmate may already have made, and it could reveal exactly what they intend to do before tomorrow arrives. The second page begins with a confession your soulmate clearly struggled to write. They admitted that the hardest part wasn't loving you, it was accepting how deeply your absence affected them. They described ordinary moments that suddenly reminded them of you, a song, a familiar place, a message they almost sent, even a quiet night when they found themselves staring at their phone, hoping your name would appear. But then they revealed something more unexpected. There had been a specific reason they kept holding back, and it wasn't because their feelings had disappeared. Someone had given them information about you that made them believe reaching out would only cause more pain. For a while, they believed it. Then they discovered the truth. What they had been told wasn't completely accurate. And the moment they realized that, they understood they may have allowed a misunderstanding to steal precious time from both of you. Then the letter becomes almost painfully honest. Your soulmate wrote about the moment they finally accepted that waiting for the perfect time was becoming another excuse for staying silent. They said they had imagined hundreds of ways to approach you, but every version ended with the same question: what if you no longer want me? That fear had become bigger than their courage. Yet something happened recently that changed that. They saw or heard something connected to you, and suddenly the memories they had buried came rushing back. Instead of pushing them away, they decided to face them. That's when they began writing this letter, not to manipulate you, not to demand anything from you, but to finally leave behind the truth they had been carrying. And there's one sentence that appears to have been added at the very last moment: I don't need you to forget what happened. I just need you to know why I disappeared. But why would they say that now, after all this time? The answer appears in the final section of the page, and this is where the letter takes a completely different turn. Your soulmate revealed that they had recently made a decision involving the future, one they had been afraid to make because it would force them to confront everything they had avoided. They wrote that they were tired of wondering what could have happened if they had been brave enough to tell you the truth sooner. Then came a sentence that seems almost like a warning. Tomorrow changes what happens next. Not someday. Not eventually. Tomorrow. And beneath those words was a date, followed by a short message that had been crossed out so heavily that only a few words could still be seen. One phrase remained completely readable: I'm coming back for the conversation we never finished. But there was one final detail hidden beneath the crossed-out words. And once that detail is uncovered, you'll understand why this letter was found now, and why your soulmate may be closer to making contact than you realize. The crossed-out words weren't random. Someone had tried to hide an entire sentence, pressing so hard into the paper that the marks nearly tore through it. But when the page was held beneath the light, a few words became visible: I was told you chose someone else. Suddenly, the silence made sense. Your soulmate had been carrying a belief that may have never been true. They thought you had moved on. They thought they had missed their chance. And instead of asking you directly, they stepped back and convinced themselves that disappearing was the only way to protect their heart. But the letter reveals something even more painful: they didn't stop watching for a sign from you. Every unexpected reminder, every familiar place, every coincidence made them wonder whether they had made the wrong decision. Then they wrote something that changes the entire story: if I had known the truth, I would have come back sooner. Don't skip, because what happened immediately after that may explain why this letter was finally discovered now. Near the bottom of the page, your soulmate described the moment they realized they could no longer live with unanswered questions. They admitted they had been preparing themselves to accept whatever answer you might give, even if it wasn't the answer they wanted. That was the first time their fear began turning into courage. They weren't promising a perfect future. They weren't pretending the past had never happened. They simply wanted one honest conversation where neither of you hid behind pride, silence, or assumptions. Then came another clue. They mentioned something they had kept for years because it reminded them of you. They didn't name it directly, but they described exactly where it came from and why it mattered. And suddenly, the letter wasn't just about returning. It was about bringing proof that their feelings had survived everything. But before they could finish writing, something happened that forced them to stop. The final lines on that page were written in noticeably darker ink, as though they had been added much later. Your soulmate wrote, "If tomorrow comes and I still haven't found the courage to say this, then let this letter speak for me." Beneath that sentence was the confession they had apparently struggled with most: they never truly stopped loving you. They had tried to bury the feeling, replace the memories, and convince themselves that time would make everything easier. It didn't. And then, almost as if they were leaving you one last choice, they wrote, "If you still feel something when you read this, don't ignore it." But there was one final piece of the letter that nobody had noticed at first. A tiny note had been written on the back of the envelope, and it contained a name, a time, and one sentence that could change what happens next. The question is, why did your soulmate leave those three things behind? The name on the envelope wasn't yours. And that was the first detail that made everyone pause. It belonged to someone connected to the story, someone who apparently knew more about your soulmate's feelings than you ever realized. Beside the name was a time, written with unusual precision, followed by 4 words, "Give this to them." For a moment, it seemed like the entire letter had been intended to pass through another person before reaching you. Your soulmate had apparently planned for this possibility. They knew fear might stop them again, so they created a backup plan. If they couldn't deliver the truth themselves, someone else would. But there was something unsettling about the date attached to the message. It wasn't from years ago. It was recent. Very recent. Which means this wasn't simply an old letter someone happened to find in a forgotten box. It may have been prepared shortly before the letter disappeared, and that raises a question your soulmate never answered. What happened right before they hid it? Inside the envelope was another tiny piece of paper, folded so tightly it almost looked blank. When it was opened, there were only 2 sentences. The first said, "I finally know what I need to do." The second said, "I just hope they haven't closed the door." Those words reveal how conflicted your soulmate has been. They aren't walking back into your life believing everything will magically return to the way it was. They're coming with uncertainty. They know you may have changed. They know time may have changed you. And more importantly, they know they hurt you by remaining silent. Yet the letter suggests they're willing to face that consequence. They would rather hear an uncomfortable truth from you than continue living inside a story built on assumptions. Something huge is waiting for you, because the next clue explains what gave them the courage to finally stop running. At the very bottom of the envelope, beneath the folded note, was a small mark your soulmate apparently used as a private reminder. It represented a moment only the 2 of you would recognize. And beside it, they had written one final question: "Do you remember?" That question isn't asking about a date or a place. It's asking whether your heart still recognizes the moment when everything between you changed. The letter suggests that your soulmate remembers it vividly, and they believe you do too. Then comes the most revealing detail of all: the time written on the envelope is approaching, and your soulmate appears to have chosen that exact moment to finally speak. But what they plan to say when that moment arrives is not an apology, not an explanation, and not even a simple confession. It is a decision about whether the 2 of you get one more chance, and the reason behind that decision is hidden in the very first line of the letter. The first line of the letter suddenly carried a completely different meaning. It wasn't simply a greeting. It was a sentence your soulmate had written after spending a long time trying to convince themselves to walk away. They wrote that they had promised themselves they would never come back unless they could return with honesty. No games. No mixed signals. No pretending they didn't care. And then they admitted the one thing they had been too afraid to say. I kept leaving because I was terrified you'd see how much I needed this to work. That confession explains why their behavior may have seemed confusing. Every time they felt closer to you, their fear became stronger. Every time they thought they might lose you, they wanted to reach out. It created a cycle of approaching, retreating, and regretting. But this time, they weren't writing from fear. They were writing because they had finally realized that silence could cost them something they might never get back. Then came the part that made the letter feel almost like a final goodbye, and yet somehow, it wasn't. Your soulmate wrote that if you had already moved forward, they would respect it. They wouldn't ask you to abandon the life you'd built. They wouldn't demand an answer simply because they had finally found their courage. But they needed you to know that their silence had never meant indifference. In fact, they said the opposite had been true. They cared so deeply that they became afraid of making the wrong move. They mentioned one particular memory from the two of you and described the exact emotion they felt that day. It was the moment they first realized you weren't temporary to them. That memory became their private secret, something they carried even when they tried to move on. And then, almost unexpectedly, the tone of the letter changed. Your soulmate stopped talking about the past and began talking about tomorrow. They wrote that tomorrow wasn't important because of a date or a deadline. It was important because they had chosen it as the moment when they would stop hiding behind uncertainty. They wanted one honest conversation, even if it changed everything. And then came a sentence that seems impossible to misunderstand. If you open this before tomorrow, you'll know what I couldn't say to your face. Beneath it was a final instruction, written almost like a secret between the two of you. Look where our story first became real. That was the clue. Your soulmate wasn't asking you to search everywhere. They were pointing toward one specific place connected to the beginning of your story. But when that location was finally identified, another discovery was waiting there. Something your soulmate had apparently left behind long before this letter was found. And that hidden object may contain the one truth they never managed to put into words. The place connected to the beginning of your story wasn't difficult to recognize. It was the kind of place most people would overlook, but your soulmate remembered it because of what happened there. Hidden nearby was a small envelope, carefully sealed and marked with the same symbol found on the original letter. Inside was something far more personal than another confession, a memory they had preserved for years. It could have been a photograph, a handwritten note, or something as simple as a small object from that first meaningful moment between you. Whatever it was, your soulmate had kept it because throwing it away would have felt like erasing the possibility of your story. And beneath it was another message. I kept this because I couldn't let myself believe it was over. That sentence reveals just how long they had been fighting between hope and fear. But there was still one question left unanswered: why hide all of this instead of simply coming to you? The answer was written on the back of that final message. Your soulmate admitted that they had tried to reach you before, more than once, but circumstances kept changing. Sometimes they stopped themselves. Sometimes they believed you wouldn't respond. And once, they came close enough to send the message but deleted it before you could ever see it. They said they were afraid of appearing too late, afraid that their return would reopen wounds, and most of all, afraid that you would look at them and realize you no longer felt the same. But then they wrote something that sounded almost like a promise: I can accept rejection. I can't accept never knowing. Those words mark the moment everything changed. They weren't returning because they expected you to forgive them instantly. They were returning because they finally valued the truth more than their fear. And that decision appears to be connected directly to the time written on the envelope. As the final page was unfolded, there were only a few lines left. Your soulmate wrote that they had spent too much time wondering whether you were still waiting, while never realizing that you might have been asking the same question about them. Then came the words that seemed to close the entire letter: tomorrow, I will finally tell you everything. But beneath that sentence was something else, 3 words written separately, almost like an afterthought: don't be afraid. Suddenly, the letter wasn't only about their fear. It was about yours too. Your soulmate seemed to understand that hearing the truth after so much silence could be overwhelming. They wanted you to know that whatever happened next, you deserved clarity. Yet the envelope still wasn't empty. One final folded strip of paper remained hidden inside, and unlike the rest of the letter, it contained no explanation at all. It contained only a question, one question your soulmate may be waiting for you to answer before tomorrow. The final question was simple, but it carried the weight of everything your soulmate had been unable to say: if I came back with nothing but the truth, would you still let me speak? There was no demand hidden inside it. No pressure. Just vulnerability. For the first time, your soulmate wasn't trying to control the outcome. They were asking for one chance to be heard. Beneath the question, they had written a few more words explaining that they didn't expect you to erase the past or instantly trust them again. They only wanted the opportunity to stand in front of you without pretending. They wanted you to see the person behind all the silence, hesitation, and distance. And perhaps that's why this letter feels so different from an ordinary love confession. It isn't asking you to chase them. It's revealing that they've finally reached the point where they are willing to stop running from you. Then you find the last sentence. Your soulmate wrote, whatever happens after tomorrow, I need you to know that loving you was never the mistake. Staying silent was. That one line changes the entire meaning of the letter. All those years of uncertainty, all the missed opportunities, all the moments when one of you wondered why the other seemed distant, they may have been shaped by fear rather than a lack of love. Your soulmate apparently knows they cannot rewrite the past. But they can finally tell you the truth about it. And that's what they've decided to do. The letter ends with a final reminder that if you still feel something when you read these words, you shouldn't ignore the feeling simply because you're afraid of what it might mean. Sometimes closure comes through goodbye. Sometimes it comes through one honest conversation that finally reveals what was hidden all along. And now you understand why the letter had to be found before tomorrow. Tomorrow isn't necessarily about a magical deadline. It's about a moment your soulmate has chosen to stop hiding. The letter was never meant to force your heart into an answer. It was meant to prepare you for the possibility of hearing something you've waited a long time to hear, the truth. Your soulmate may still be nervous. they may still hesitate. But the final clue suggests they have already made their decision, to speak, to face whatever comes next, and to stop letting fear decide the ending of your story. So if this message reached you at a moment when